Jordan Hayes had killed 12 men in her military career. None of them had deserved it less than the gym owner she was about to meet. "Move faster, old man, or find yourself another job. I don't pay you to waste my time." The voice cut through the afternoon air of Ironclad Combat Academy like a blade. Jordan froze in the doorway, her faded gray shirt blending with the departing students. She'd only stopped here because of a promise made to a dying Marine named Marcus Bennett, whispered with his last breath in a compound in Syria 3 months ago. "Take care of my old man, Ghost. Promise me." She hadn't intended to intervene. The gym was just another landmark from her past, a place where she'd trained briefly in 2011 before heading to Bud S, before the Navy had stripped away everything gentle and forged her into something lethal. She'd come only to check on Marcus's father, confirm he was alive, then disappear back into her own guilt and grief. But the gym had transformed since her memory. Where inspirational posters of jiu-jitsu legends once hung, now glossy photographs of the current owner, Tyler Harrison, dominated the walls, showing him clutching championship belts with practiced arrogance. The welcoming training hall where students once encouraged each other had become something colder, more ruthless, where dominance mattered more than discipline. And that voice, that tone of casual cruelty. Jordan's fists clenched as she watched what happened next. She recognized that tone, the voice of a bully who'd forgotten what real strength meant. What she was about to do would change everything. For the bully, for the old man being humiliated, and for herself. Because some promises to the dead demanded more than just showing up. Quick pause before we continue. If you're watching this from somewhere in the world right now, let me know in the comments. I read every single one. And if you're enjoying stories like this, make sure to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell, because tomorrow's episode, it goes even deeper than this. The words came from the center of the mat where Tyler Harrison stood, arms crossed over a muscular chest. At 38, he had the build of someone who'd dedicated his life to physical dominance. His black belt hung like a crown of authority, and his eyes held that particular smugness of someone who'd confused skill with character. At the mat's edge, an elderly man knelt with cleaning supplies. Perhaps 68, his silver hair was cropped military short, and his shoulders still carried echoes of former strength. His hands trembled as he wrung out a mop, moving with the careful invisibility of someone who'd learned that staying small meant staying safe. Jordan's gaze caught the tattoo on his forearm, the eagle, globe, and anchor of the United States Marine Corps. The ink had faded to pale blue-green from decades of sun and hard living, but the symbol was unmistakable. A Marine, reduced to being screamed at by some gym owner with an ego problem. "I apologize, Mr. Harrison," the old man said quietly, his voice gravelly. "You asked me to clean before the 6 o'clock class. I'm just trying to—" "I told you to clean after everyone left," Tyler cut him off sharply. "Can't you follow basic instructions? Or is that too complex for your aging brain?" 3 students lingered near the walls, pretending to adjust their gear while watching with the guilty fascination of witnesses who lacked the courage to intervene. One young man, maybe 19, caught Jordan's eye and quickly looked away. Tyler approached the old man deliberately, his bare feet slapping the mat with intimidating weight. When he reached the bucket, he didn't step around it. He kicked it. Hard. Dirty water exploded across the mat, splashing the old man's worn sneakers and uniform pants. The bucket clattered sideways, rolling in a slow arc before hitting the wall. "Now look what you've done," Tyler said with mock disappointment. "Clean it up. And this time, try not to make things worse." The old man didn't respond. He just stared at the spreading water with the kind of resignation that comes from having your dignity stripped away so many times you stop expecting it back. But Jordan Hayes was done watching. Jordan moved. 10 measured steps carried her from the doorway to the mat, her boots nearly silent against the floor. The remaining students noticed first, their conversations dying as this stranger in civilian clothes walked onto the training space like she belonged there. Tyler noticed a moment later, turning with irritation written across his features. "That's no way to treat a veteran," Jordan said calmly, though anger burned cold in her chest. "Especially not a Marine." Tyler's eyes swept over her, cataloging the plain clothes, absence of gym bag, and female features that immediately categorized her in his worldview as someone who didn't belong. "Who are you, his attorney?" he asked mockingly. "This is a fight gym, princess, not a charity operation." The old man looked up at Jordan, and she saw it then, the shame. The kind that came from needing a job badly enough to endure humiliation. The kind that came from knowing if you spoke up, you'd be job hunting at 68 in an economy that had already written you off. "I'm someone who recognizes disrespect when I see it," Jordan replied evenly. Tyler stepped closer. At 6'1" and 200 pounds of muscle and ego, he looked down at her 5'8" frame with utter confidence in his physical superiority. "Let me guess," he said with a smirk. "You took a cardio kickboxing class once at the YMCA? Think you understand martial arts? Think you're tough because you can punch a bag?" One student snickered. The young one who'd looked away stayed silent. Jordan held Tyler's gaze without blinking. In her peripheral vision, she could see the old man still kneeling by the spilled water, frozen with growing concern. "I know enough to recognize a bully when I see one," she said quietly. The word landed like a slap. Tyler's face flushed, a vein pulsing at his temple. He was used to being called many things: champion, tough, uncompromising, but never that, and he wasn't about to let it stand. "Big words," Tyler said, his voice dropping to what he thought was a dangerous register. "You want to back them up, or just keep running your mouth?" Jordan glanced at the old man again. Their eyes met for just a second, and in that moment, she saw what she'd recognized in 100 other veterans: the weariness, the weight of service the civilian world couldn't understand or appreciate, the quiet dignity that couldn't be stripped away no matter how much someone tried. She looked back at Tyler. "I'll step on your mat if that's what it takes to make a point." Complete silence fell over the gym. Even the air conditioning seemed to fade into the background. Tyler's expression shifted from anger to anticipation. This was familiar ground for him, where he proved himself repeatedly against anyone foolish enough to challenge his authority. "Unless you're scared," he added, mockery thick in his voice. "I'm not scared," Jordan said simply. The young student who'd been silent finally spoke up. "Ma'am, don't." His voice was quiet but urgent. "He hospitalizes people for entertainment. Just let it go." Jordan turned to look at him. He was lean with posture that suggested military background. Despite his youth, genuine worry filled his eyes, concern for a stranger foolish enough to speak up. "What's your name?" she asked. "Connor, ma'am, Connor Wright." The ma'am told her everything. Military, probably Army based on his bearing. "I appreciate the warning, Connor," she said, "but some things are worth the risk." She turned back to Tyler. "What are the rules?" Tyler smiled unpleasantly. "My mat, my rules, grappling only, no striking. First tap loses. Unless you want to reconsider, no shame in backing down." Jordan looked at the old man one more time. He was shaking his head slightly, eyes pleading with her not to do this, not to risk herself for him. He'd learned long ago that standing up usually meant 2 people getting hurt instead of 1. But Jordan had made a promise to a dead Marine, and that promise extended to protecting his father. "I'll need to borrow a GI, Jordan said. Tyler's smile widened. "Natalie," he called out. A door at the back opened and a woman emerged. mid-30s, with Tyler's sharp features softened by perpetual concern. She wore yoga pants and a physical therapy clinic shirt, taking in the scene with the weary expression of someone who'd witnessed this too many times. "What now, Tyler?" she asked with resignation. "Our guest needs to borrow your GI. She wants to learn about respect." Natalie Harrison looked at Jordan, then at her brother, then at the old man still kneeling by the water. Understanding and sympathy crossed her face. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly to Jordan. "Yes," Jordan replied. "I do." 5 minutes later, Jordan stood on the mat in a borrowed GI that fit almost perfectly. The fabric was worn soft from years of training, smelling faintly of detergent and sweat. Tyler had changed into his own GI, the black belt retied with ritualistic precision. The 3 students positioned themselves along the wall, phones out, ready to record. Word had spread somehow, and more people filtered in from the parking lot. Nothing drew a crowd like the promise of violence. The old man had finished mopping the spilled water. He stood near the wall now, the bucket and mop abandoned beside him, hands clasped in front of him, knuckles white with tension. Tyler began warming up with practiced movements, rolling shoulders, bouncing on his toes, making sure everyone could see the fluid power in his frame. He was skilled. Jordan could see that immediately. His movements were efficient, backed by years of training and competition. He'd built his entire identity around being the most dangerous person in any room. He had no idea what he was dealing with. Jordan didn't warm up. She simply stood on the mat, breathing steadily, letting her heart rate settle into the calm rhythm she'd learned under circumstances far more stressful than this. In her mind, she wasn't in a San Diego gym. She was in a compound in eastern Syria, Marcus Bennett bleeding out 6 feet away while insurgents closed in from 3 directions. She was in the cold waters off Virginia Beach during Hell Week, hypothermia setting in while instructors screamed that she'd never make it. This was just another test, and Jordan Hayes had built a career on passing tests designed to break her. "Ready whenever you are, sweetheart," Tyler said, condescension dripping from every word. "Don't worry, I'll go easy on you. Wouldn't want you to break a nail." But he had no idea he'd just challenged someone who'd survived things that would shatter his entire worldview. Natalie stepped forward, apparently self-appointed as referee. "This is supposed to be controlled sparring," she said, directing the words more at her brother than Jordan. "Grappling only, first tap ends it, understood?" "Crystal clear," Tyler said smugly. Jordan just nodded. "Okay then," Natalie looked uncomfortable. "Begin." Tyler moved first, closing distance with the confidence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. His stance was textbook, footwork precise. He reached for Jordan's collar with his right hand, a standard grip that would give him control and set up a dozen different attacks. His hand closed on empty air. Jordan had shifted, a movement so economical it barely looked like she'd moved at all. But suddenly she wasn't where Tyler expected. His grip found nothing, and his forward momentum carried him slightly off balance. Not much, just enough. He recovered immediately, resetting his stance. The smile faded from his face, replaced by concentration. He came again, this time attempting a collar and sleeve grip to establish control before attempting techniques. Jordan allowed the collar grip, let him think he had something. Then, as he began pulling her forward to set up a throw, she moved. Her weight shifted in a way that disrupted his base. Her hips angled so his pulling motion became ineffective. When he tried to adjust, she was already somewhere else and his sleeve grip slipped free. Tyler stepped back, breathing slightly harder. The crowd murmured. They'd expected dominance, expected their instructor to overwhelm this stranger in the first 30 seconds. But 45 seconds had passed and he hadn't landed a single technique. "Fight back," Tyler said, frustration edging his voice. "Or are you just going to run away?" Jordan didn't respond. Her breathing remained steady, expression calm. She was reading him now, cataloging patterns, identifying the tells that preceded each attack. Every fighter had them. The slight shoulder drop before a throw, the weight shift before a takedown. Tyler was skilled, but he'd spent his entire career in sport grappling where there were rules, referees, weight classes, and time limits. Jordan had spent her career where the only rule was survival. Tyler came in harder this time, frustration overriding technical precision. He shot for a double-leg takedown, a wrestler's attack designed to drive through his opponent and put them on their back. It was fast, explosive, the kind of movement that had probably won him dozens of matches. But Jordan had been trained by the best operators in the world, and she was about to show him the difference between sport and combat. Jordan sprawled. The technique was textbook perfect. Her hips drove back. Her weight descended onto Tyler's shoulders. Suddenly he was carrying all her mass while trying to complete a takedown that required mobility he no longer had. He strained, trying to power through, but Jordan's base was immovable. Then she moved. Her right arm slipped under his armpit. Her left arm wrapped around his back. Her body shifted with fluid precision that spoke of movements practiced 10,000 times. Tyler felt his entire world tilt as she spun to his back. The students along the wall leaned forward. This was technique they'd never seen before. Jordan's legs wrapped around Tyler's torso in a body triangle, one calf locked behind the opposite knee, creating a vice of pressure that compressed his rib cage and made drawing a full breath difficult. Her right arm snaked around his neck, not in a choke yet, just establishing position. Her left hand gripped her right wrist, completing the structure. Tyler had been in bad positions before. Every grappler had. But there was something different about this. The pressure was immense, perfectly distributed, and utterly inescapable. He tried to peel her legs apart, couldn't. Tried to turn into her, couldn't. Tried to buck her off, couldn't. Her body felt like it was made of cables and concrete, every point of contact a source of pressure that made his options narrow with each passing second. "Tap," Jordan said quietly, her voice almost gentle. "Before you pass out." Tyler's face was beginning to turn red. 15 seconds had passed since she'd taken his back. 15 seconds in which he'd been utterly unable to escape or improve his position. His pride screamed at him to resist, to tough it out, to prove he was stronger than this woman who'd walked into his gym and challenged him. But his body was sending different signals. His breathing was labored. His vision was starting to narrow at the edges. And there was something in the absolute control she had over him that spoke of levels he hadn't even known existed. He tapped, 3 quick strikes against her forearm, the universal signal of submission. Jordan released him instantly. Her legs unwrapped, her arms withdrew, and she moved away with the same fluid efficiency she demonstrated throughout. She stood up, breathing barely elevated, and extended a hand to help him up. Tyler ignored the hand. He rolled to his knees, gulping air, his face flushed with exertion and humiliation. The gym was absolutely silent. Phones were still recording, capturing every moment of their instructor being dominated by a woman they'd been watching with skepticism 90 seconds ago. And Tyler Harrison was about to make the worst mistake of his life. He stood on his own, legs slightly unsteady. When he looked at Jordan, there was something new in his eyes, not respect, not yet, but the first crack in his certainty. "Where the hell did you learn that?" he asked. Jordan's expression didn't change. "Here and there, military bases mostly." Tyler's breathing was slowing now, color returning to normal. "You're military." It wasn't really a question. "What branch? Army, supply clerk, Air Force desk job?" "Navy," Jordan said. The word seemed to hang in the air for a moment. Then Tyler laughed, a short, sharp sound devoid of actual humor. "Navy, so what, you filed paperwork on ships, pushed papers around some office in Norfolk? That's adorable." Connor Wright spoke from the wall. "Sir, maybe you should." "Shut up, Connor," Tyler snapped. "Your opinion doesn't count here, it never has." The young man's face flushed, but he fell silent. Jordan saw the shame there, the familiar weight of being told you're worthless by someone who's supposed to be teaching you. She turned her attention back to Tyler. "Is that all, or do you need another round to convince yourself that was a fluke?" Tyler's jaw clenched. She'd hit exactly the nerve she'd intended, the suggestion that what just happened was luck, not skill. The implication that he needed to prove something, to reassert dominance, to erase the last 2 minutes from everyone's memory. "Actually," he said, "I think we need to do this properly. No gi, no rules, MMA sparring. Tomorrow, 6 p.m. unless you're scared." Jordan glanced at the old man by the wall. He was shaking his head slightly, expression pleading with her not to accept. This wasn't his fight. He'd survived 68 years by keeping his head down, by enduring humiliation rather than risking confrontation. He didn't want her hurt on his behalf, but Jordan had made a promise to a dead Marine. And that promise extended beyond just checking on Victor Bennett. It extended to protecting him, to standing up for him when he'd been ground down too far to stand up for himself. "One condition," Jordan said, and the words that came next would change everything, not just for her and Tyler, but for everyone in that gym who'd forgotten what real strength looked like. "What's that?" Tyler crossed his arms. "When I win, you apologize to Mr. Bennett here, publicly in front of all your students, and you treat your staff with the respect they deserve." The old man made a small sound, something between a gasp and a protest. Tyler looked at him, then back at Jordan, and smiled. It was the smile of a predator who'd just been offered exactly what he wanted. "When you win," he repeated. "Honey, you got lucky once, that's all. Tomorrow I'll show you where women really belong, and it's not on a combat mat." "We'll see," Jordan said. She began removing the gi, folding it neatly despite the adrenaline still coursing through her system. Training, discipline, the small rituals that kept you grounded when violence threatened to overwhelm thought. Natalie approached her quietly. "That was impressive," she said, "but tomorrow he won't hold back. He'll hurt you if he can. His pride won't let him do anything else." "I know," Jordan said. "Then why do it?" Jordan finished folding the gi and handed it back to Natalie. She looked at the other woman for a moment, considering how much truth to share with a stranger. "Because someone has to," she finally said. She walked toward the exit, her boots finding the same measured rhythm they'd had when she entered. The crowd parted for her, students watching with expressions ranging from disbelief to something approaching respect. Connor Wright caught her eye as she passed and nodded slightly, a warrior's acknowledgement. At the doorway, Jordan paused and turned back. The old man was still standing by the wall maintenance bucket beside him, eyes following her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Semper Fidelis, sir," she said. "Thank you for your service." Victor Bennett's eyes widened, his mouth opening slightly in surprise, the careful mask of invisibility breaking. His right hand began to rise, perhaps toward a salute, then stopped halfway, old habits dying hard. "How did you?" he started to say. "Tomorrow, 6 p.m., Tyler interrupted, stepping between them, his voice loud as he reasserted authority over his own space. "Don't be late, and don't expect the same outcome." But as Jordan walked out into the late afternoon sun, Victor Bennett stood motionless, staring at the empty doorway where a stranger had appeared, challenged a bully on his behalf, and then disappeared. For the first time in 3 months, since the day he'd written a letter to his son Marcus and received no response, Victor Bennett felt something other than resignation. He felt hope. And he had no idea that hope was about to be shattered. In a budget hotel room 3 miles away, Jordan Hayes sat on the edge of a bed that had seen better decades and pulled out her phone. The contact name read Hawk. She hit the call button and waited through 2 rings before a gravel, rough voice answered. "Ghost, didn't expect to hear from you so soon." "Colonel Preston," Jordan said. "I found Marcus's father." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "And?" "He doesn't know about Marcus. The notification never made it to him. They were estranged." Another pause, longer this time. "You going to tell him?" Jordan looked at her reflection in the mirror across from the bed. She looked tired, felt tired, the kind of tired that sleep couldn't fix. "I don't know how," she admitted. "How do you tell a father that his son died saving your life, that the last conversation they had was a fight, and now there won't be any more conversations ever?" "The same way you tell yourself it wasn't your fault," Colonel Preston said. "You open your mouth and you say the words and you live with the weight. There's no easy way, Hayes, there's just the way." "I know. What else is going on? You didn't call just to tell me you found Bennett." Jordan smiled slightly, though there was no humor in it. "I may have gotten into a situation." "What kind of situation?" "The kind that involves defending a 68-year-old Marine from a bully and agreeing to an MMA sparring match tomorrow at 6 p.m. Silence. Then, "Jesus Christ, Hayes. You've been there less than 8 hours. Marcus's father was being humiliated. I couldn't just walk away." "No," Preston said, his voice softening slightly. "I don't suppose you could. That's never been your strong suit." Another pause. "You need backup for a gym fight?" "I think I can handle it." "I wasn't asking if you could handle it. I was asking if you wanted company. Sometimes it helps to have a friendly face in the crowd." Jordan felt something warm spread through her chest. After 10 years of service, she'd learned that bonds forged in combat ran deeper than family, stronger than blood. But what she didn't know yet was that tomorrow wouldn't just be about a gym fight. Tomorrow she would destroy a father's last shred of hope, and Colonel Preston would be there to help pick up the pieces. "You don't have to," Jordan said quietly. "I'll be there at 17:30, Preston interrupted. "Try not to start any more fights before I arrive." "No promises, Hawk." She could hear the smile in his voice when he responded. "Wouldn't expect any, Ghost. Wouldn't expect any." The call ended, leaving Jordan alone in the silence of a cheap hotel room with ghosts that wouldn't stay quiet and a promise that was getting more complicated by the hour. Tomorrow she would tell Victor Bennett that his son was dead. Tomorrow she would fight a man whose ego demanded he prove his dominance over a woman who'd embarrassed him. But tonight she would remember. She closed her eyes and saw Marcus Bennett the way she'd seen him that last time, blood spreading across his uniform, his hand gripping hers with fading strength, his voice barely a whisper as he said the last words he'd ever speak. "Take care of my old man, Ghost. He's alone now. Promise me." "I promise," she'd said, and here she was, keeping that promise the only way she knew how, by standing up when standing up meant getting knocked down, by fighting when fighting meant getting hurt, by protecting someone who couldn't protect himself, because that's what warriors did. That's what Marcus had done. And if Jordan Hayes was going to honor his memory, she would do the same. Across the city, in an apartment building on the edge of National City that had seen better decades, Victor Bennett sat at a small table with a legal pad in front of him and a pen gripped in fingers that still trembled. He'd been writing letters to Marcus for 9 months, ever since their last phone call had ended badly. Ever since Victor had told his son that staying in the Marines was a waste of potential, that private security paid 3 times as much, that loyalty to a government that didn't care about its veterans was foolish idealism. Marcus had hung up mid-sentence, hadn't called back. And Victor had been writing letters ever since, apologies he could never quite finish, explanations that never quite explained, reaching across a silence that grew heavier with each passing week. What Victor didn't know was that the silence was permanent now. That Marcus's body had been shipped back to his mother in Phoenix 3 months ago. That the notification had gone to Marcus's ex-wife first, who'd never bothered to update the emergency contact list to include the estranged father in California. That while Victor had been writing letters, his son had been buried at Fort Rosecrans National Cemetery, 15 miles from where Victor now sat in ignorance. The pen touched paper. "Dear Marcus," he wrote, "I got a job at a gym downtown. It's just maintenance work, but it pays enough to cover rent." But as Victor wrote to a son who would never read his words, across the city Jordan Hayes was preparing to deliver the message that would shatter Victor's world. And neither of them knew that tomorrow would be the hardest day of both their lives. The walls of Victor's small apartment told his real story. Every available surface was covered with photographs, certificates, and memorabilia from a life spent in service. A young Victor in Marine Corps dress blues, 1975, fresh-faced and eager before the world taught him what war actually meant. Photos from boot camp at Paris Island. Group shots from force recon training, men who'd learned to operate in the deepest shadows. Images from the Persian Gulf, 1991. Somalia, 1993, where everything went to hell and the rules of engagement meant watching people die while politicians argued about jurisdiction. And in the center of it all, positioned at eye level beside the small television, a shrine. Not elaborate, just a wooden shelf with 3 items carefully arranged. A photograph of Marcus Bennett in Marine Corps uniform, taken before his first deployment to Afghanistan in 2011. He was 23 in that photo, his father's eyes staring out from a younger face, the kind of confidence that came from not yet knowing what combat would ask of him. Beside the photo, a folded American flag in a triangular case, presented to Victor at his wife's funeral 6 years ago, back when he'd still had someone to share the silence with. And finally, a small wooden box containing Marcus's first set of dog tags from boot camp, the metal dulled with age but the stamped letters still legible. Victor set his pen down and stared at the words he'd just written. They felt inadequate, like everything else he'd tried to say over the past 9 months. He folded the letter carefully and placed it in an envelope that would never be mailed, adding it to the stack of identical envelopes in his drawer. 53 letters. 53 attempts to bridge a gap that he didn't realize had become infinite. His medication bottles sat beside the lamp, 3 prescriptions lined up like soldiers. PTSD medication, though the VA psychiatrist called it adjustment disorder, because acknowledging what Mogadishu had done to him would require admitting the government had sent him into a situation with no clear objectives and no proper support. Anxiety pills for the crowds and loud noises, because apparently watching your friends die in streets named after dictators led to problems that never fully healed. Sleep aids for the dreams, because 40 years hadn't been enough time to erase the smell of burning flesh that no amount of medication could completely wash away. He took them with water from a gas station promotional glass, swallowed them down, and waited for the chemical fog to soften the day's edges. A woman had stood up for him today. A complete stranger had challenged Tyler Harrison and seemed to take personal pleasure in defending him. She'd said, "Semper Fidelis." She'd seen his tattoo, recognized what he was. And Victor couldn't shake the feeling that she knew something, that there was more to her appearance than coincidence. But what he didn't know was that tomorrow, that same woman would deliver news that would break him in ways Mogadishu never had. Victor looked at Marcus's photograph and felt tears burning at the corners of his eyes. "I met someone today," he said to the image. "She reminded me of you, that same, I don't know, fire, the kind that doesn't go out just because the world tries to smother it." The photograph offered no response. It never did. Victor closed his eyes and let the medication begin its work, pulling him down towards something that might pass for sleep if he was lucky. Tomorrow he would return to the gym. Tomorrow, Tyler would probably make him pay for the embarrassment of being challenged. Tomorrow would be like every other day, a slow erosion of dignity measured in mop strokes and condescending remarks. But tonight, for just a moment, he remembered what it felt like to have someone stand beside him. And in that memory, there was something that felt dangerously close to hope. In a house in La Jolla that reflected the kind of success that came from turning passion into profit, Tyler Harrison sat in his home gym reviewing footage on his laptop. The video was from a student's phone, shaky but clear enough to show every detail of his engagement with the woman who'd walked into his gym and made him look weak. He watched himself shoot the double-leg takedown, watched her sprawl with perfect technique, watched the transition to back control happen so smoothly it looked choreographed, watched himself tap out after 15 seconds of struggling like a white belt caught by a black belt. "You need to let this go," Natalie said from the doorway. Tyler didn't look up from the screen. "She got lucky. She dominated you, Tyler. There's a difference. She caught me off guard. Tomorrow will be different." Natalie walked into the room and sat on the weight bench across from him. She was still in her work scrubs from the physical therapy clinic where she spent her days helping people rebuild strength that injury or age had stolen. She looked tired, the kind of tired that came from caring too much about people who didn't always care about themselves. "Why do you do this?" she asked. "Why do you need to constantly prove yourself?" Tyler's jaw clenched. "I'm not proving anything. I'm defending my reputation." "Your reputation or your ego? You don't understand what it's like," Tyler said, and for the first time his voice held something other than arrogance. It held pain. And his sister was about to force him to confront a truth he'd been running from for a decade. "Then explain it to me," Natalie pressed. Tyler closed the laptop harder than necessary. Dad died being a hero. Everyone knows his story, how he took 3 rounds saving his partner, how he bled out before the ambulance arrived, how he gave everything for the job. I know, Tyler, I was there. I remember the funeral. Then you remember how everyone looked at me, the son, the one who was supposed to carry on the legacy. And what did I do? I opened a gym. I teach people how to choke each other out. Real heroic. Natalie's expression softened. Dad would have been proud of you. You help people. You teach discipline. That matters. It's not the same. No, it's not. And that's okay. You don't have to be Dad. Tyler stood and walked to the window, looking out at a backyard that had cost more than their father had earned in his entire career. That woman walked into my gym and embarrassed me in front of my students. If I let that stand, if I don't prove it was a fluke, then what am I? Just another fraud teaching techniques I can't actually use. Or, Natalie said quietly, you could acknowledge that she's clearly had training you haven't, that there are levels beyond sport grappling, that being beaten doesn't make you weak, it makes you human. She's Navy, Tyler said, his voice dripping with contempt. What does the Navy know about hand-to-hand combat? They drive boats. You don't actually believe that. Tyler didn't respond because she was right. He'd seen the way the woman moved, the absolute calm in her eyes, the efficiency of every motion, no wasted energy, no unnecessary force. That kind of skill came from training that went beyond competition, beyond points and time limits and weight classes. But admitting that would mean admitting he'd been wrong about women in combat, about his own superiority, about the narrative he'd built his entire identity around. Tomorrow I'll be ready, he said. No-gi means I can use my wrestling, my conditioning, my strength advantage. And when I win, everything goes back to normal. And if you don't win, I will. Natalie stood and walked to the door. Before leaving, she turned back. Dad wouldn't want you to be a bully, Tyler. He protected people. He didn't humiliate them. That old man at your gym, the janitor you treat like garbage, Dad would have been ashamed of how you talk to him. And with those words, she left Tyler alone with a truth he wasn't ready to face. But truth had a way of forcing itself into the light, whether you were ready or not. The morning arrived with the kind of coastal fog that turned San Diego into a collection of gray shapes and muted sounds. Jordan had been awake since 500, old habits pulling her from sleep before her body was ready. She'd run 8 miles through streets still empty of traffic, pushing her pace until her lungs burned and her legs screamed, trying to outrun thoughts that had no interest in being left behind. By 900, she was showered and dressed, sitting in a coffee shop 2 blocks from Ironclad Combat Academy, watching the entrance through the window while pretending to read news on her phone. Students began arriving around 1,000 for morning classes. She recognized a few faces from yesterday, including Connor Wright, the young Army veteran who tried to warn her away from Tyler's challenge. At 10:45, Tyler himself arrived in a black BMW that probably cost more than Victor Bennett had earned in the last 5 years. He moved with the swagger of someone who'd convinced himself that yesterday had been a fluke, that today would restore the natural order. At 11:30, Victor Bennett shuffled into view, carrying his maintenance supplies in a canvas bag that had seen better decades. He moved slowly, like a man trying to make himself small, trying to pass through the world without drawing attention. Jordan watched him for 30 seconds, gathering her resolve. This was it. The conversation she'd been dreading since Preston's call 3 months ago. The moment when she would watch hope die in an old man's eyes and know that she was the one who'd killed it. She stood, left exact change on the table, and crossed the street before doubt could stop her. She caught Victor just as he was reaching for the gym's side entrance, the one marked staff only that led to the maintenance closet where he probably stored his supplies and ate lunch alone. "Mr. Bennett," she said quietly. He turned, surprise flickering across his weathered face. Recognition followed a moment later. "You're the woman from yesterday." The one who, he stopped, glancing toward the gym's front entrance. "You shouldn't be here. Tyler's been telling everyone about tonight. He's angry, really angry." "I know, that's not why I'm here right now." Victor looked at her more carefully, and something in her expression made his own face shift from concern to weariness. "What's wrong? Is there somewhere we can talk, somewhere private? I don't understand. Please, Mr. Bennett, it's important." The weariness deepened into something approaching fear. "This is about Marcus, isn't it?" Victor's voice cracked. "You said you knew him yesterday before Tyler interrupted. You were going to tell me something." And in that moment, Victor Bennett's last peaceful moments ended. Everything he'd believed about his life, his son, his hope for reconciliation, all of it was about to crumble. Jordan felt her throat tighten. This was the moment, the one she'd been dreading since Colonel Preston's phone call 3 months ago when she'd learned that Marcus's notification had gone to his ex-wife and somehow Victor had been left out of the loop. The moment when she would have to watch hope die in an old man's eyes. "There's a park 2 blocks south," she said. "Can you spare 15 minutes?" Victor set down his canvas bag. His hands were shaking again, worse than yesterday. "He's dead, isn't he? My son is dead." The words hung in the fog between them. Jordan wanted to soften it, to ease into the truth with careful phrasing and gentle preparation. But Victor Bennett was a Marine. He'd faced hard truths before. Lying to him now, even with kindness, would be the greater insult. "Yes, sir," she said. "I'm sorry." Victor's knees buckled slightly. He caught himself against the wall, one hand pressed flat against the rough stucco while his breath came in short, sharp gasps. "When?" "May 15th, 3 months ago." "Syria, 3 months." The words came out as barely more than a whisper. "He's been dead for 3 months and nobody told me. The notification went to his ex-wife. You weren't listed as next of kin. The system failed you, sir. I'm sorry." Victor pushed off from the wall and began walking, not toward the park, not toward the gym, just walking like a man who needed to move or collapse. Jordan followed, matching his pace, giving him space while staying close enough to catch him if he fell. They ended up at the park anyway, a small square of grass and playground equipment surrounded by chain-link fence, empty at this hour on a Tuesday morning. Victor sat heavily on a bench that faced the swing set, staring at nothing, his face the color of old concrete. Jordan sat beside him and waited. She'd learned in the aftermath of Marcus's death that sometimes the kindest thing you could offer someone was silence. Space to process the impossible. Time to let the world reshape itself around an absence that couldn't be filled. "How?" Victor finally asked, his voice steady now, controlled, the Marine taking over from the father. "How did he die?" Jordan considered lying. Considered telling Victor that Marcus had died instantly, that there had been no pain, no fear, no awareness. But she'd already decided that Victor deserved truth, not comfort. And the truth she was about to tell would either save him or destroy him. There was no way to know which until the words were spoken. "We were conducting a raid on a suspected insurgent safe house," Jordan said carefully. Marcus identified a threat that I missed. He drew fire to protect the team, took 3 rounds to the chest and abdomen. Our medic did everything possible, but the wounds were too severe. Did he suffer? Jordan considered lying. Considered telling Victor that Marcus had died instantly, but she'd already committed to truth. Yes, sir, but not for long, maybe 3 minutes from first shot to the end. He was conscious, he knew what was happening. Victor's hands clenched into fists on his knees. Did he say anything? This was the moment Jordan had been dreading most. Because what Marcus had said in those final 3 minutes would either save Victor or destroy him, and there was no way to know which until the words were spoken. He asked me to tell you that he loved you, that he understood why you fought, that he never stopped looking up to you. Victor made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob, something caught between disbelief and desperate hope. You're lying, trying to make me feel better. No, sir, those were his exact words. Tell my old man I love him. Tell him I get it now. Tell him he was right about everything that matters. I wasn't right. I told him he was wasting his life. Told him the Marines would use him up and throw him away. We fought for an hour on the phone, and I said terrible things. He knew you were scared. He told me about that conversation. Said his father had seen what war did to people and didn't want that for his son. Said it came from love, even if it sounded like anger. Victor turned to look at her for the first time since sitting down. His eyes were red-rimmed but dry, years of practiced emotional control keeping the tears locked away. Who are you really? Lieutenant Jordan Hayes, Navy SEAL. Marcus was my swim buddy during Bud S training. We went through Hell Week in the same boat crew. He saved my life in Syria. The rounds that killed him were meant for me. Understanding dawned across Victor's face. You came here because you feel guilty. I came here because I made a promise. Marcus asked me to check on you to make sure you were okay. That's what I'm doing. By telling me my son died 3 months ago while I was writing him letters. Victor's voice rose with anger. While I was sitting in that apartment waiting for him to call, that's your idea of keeping a promise. The anger in his voice was justified, expected, easier to handle than grief. But Jordan knew that anger was just the surface. Beneath it was an ocean of pain that would take years to cross. And she was about to dive in with him. Jordan started. Don't tell me it gets easier. Victor held up one hand. Don't tell me time heals. Don't give me any of that garbage people say when they don't know what else to say. I wasn't going to, Jordan said quietly. I was going to tell you that Marcus was the bravest man I ever served with. That he made me a better operator and a better person. That losing him broke something in me that hasn't healed and probably never will. And that if you need someone to be angry at, I'm right here. Because I should have seen that threat first. I should have been the one who took those rounds. Victor stared at her for a long moment. Then he sat back down, suddenly looking every one of his 68 years and then some. How do you live with it, the guilt? Badly. I don't sleep much. When I do, I see him bleeding out. I replay those 3 minutes over and over, looking for the moment where I could have done something different, been faster, been better. And I keep his promise because it's the only thing that makes the guilt feel like it might have purpose. Is that why you're fighting Tyler tonight? Because you think getting hurt will balance some cosmic ledger? Partly. Also because Tyler was treating you like garbage and someone needed to stop him. I don't need saving. Everyone needs saving sometimes, Mr. Bennett. Marcus understood that. It's why he stepped into that line of fire. Victor was quiet for a long time, staring at the empty swing set while the fog began to lift and the morning sun tried to burn through. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer, the anger drained away, leaving only exhaustion. I wrote him 53 letters, 53 attempts to apologize for a phone call I can't take back, and he was already dead. He was already gone, and I was just talking to a ghost. He knew you loved him, before that phone call, after it, always. He carried your photo on every deployment, talked about you constantly. You were his hero, sir. Some hero, Victor's voice broke. I'm a 68-year-old janitor getting bullied by a man half my age. And in that moment of raw vulnerability, Jordan understood that this fight tonight wasn't just about putting Tyler Harrison in his place. It was about reminding Victor Bennett and herself that warriors never stopped being warriors, no matter how much the world tried to tell them otherwise. You're a Force Recon Marine who served his country with honor, Jordan said firmly. What you do for a paycheck doesn't change what you are. Victor turned to look at her again. Why does Tyler hate me so much? I've never done anything to him except try to do my job. Because you remind him of something he's afraid of, getting old, being weak, being vulnerable, needing help. Men like Tyler build their entire identity around being the strongest person in the room. Anyone who threatens that, even by existing, becomes a target. And you're going to fight him to prove a point. I'm going to fight him because I made you a promise that he'd apologize, that he'd treat you with respect, and I keep my promises. Like the promise you made to Marcus. Exactly like that. Victor stood again, slower this time. I need to get to work. Tyler will be angry if I'm late. You don't have to go back there. I can help you find another job, somewhere you're treated like a human being. I'm not a charity case. No, sir, you're a Marine, and Marines help each other. That's not charity, that's brotherhood. Something shifted in Victor's expression, not acceptance, not yet, but maybe the first crack in the wall he'd built around himself. Will you be there tonight at the fight? Yes, sir. Good, I want to watch you knock some sense into that arrogant son of a bitch. The ghost of a smile crossed Jordan's face. I'll do my best, sir. And after you've proven whatever you're trying to prove, after we'll figure out what comes next, together. Victor nodded slowly. He started to walk away, then stopped and turned back. Lieutenant Hayes, yes, sir. Thank you for telling me, for keeping your promise, for being there when my son needed someone. I wish I'd been faster. So do I, but you weren't, and he made his choice. Don't dishonor it by pretending you had control over what he decided to do. Then Victor Bennett walked away, his shoulders a little straighter than they'd been, heading toward a job that diminished him, but that he would do anyway because pride and bills required it. Jordan sat alone on the bench and allowed herself exactly 60 seconds of grief. 60 seconds to feel the weight of what she'd just done, the pain she'd caused, the hope she'd extinguished. 60 seconds to acknowledge that telling Victor had hurt worse than taking the rounds that killed Marcus would have. Then she stood, squared her shoulders, and began the final preparations. The hours between noon and evening stretched and compressed simultaneously. Jordan returned to her hotel, mechanically checked her gear, and tried not to think about Marcus's last moments or Victor's broken expression. But at 1700, as she began the walk to Ironclad Combat Academy, she knew that tonight would be about more than just defeating Tyler Harrison. Tonight would be about showing everyone in that gym, including herself, what real strength looked like. By 1730, Ironclad Combat Academy was packed. Word had spread through the local MMA community, amplified by Tyler's Instagram post and the promise of violence. Perhaps 60 people crowded into a space designed for 30, lining the walls, sitting on equipment, phones already out and recording. Colonel Barrett Preston arrived at precisely 17:30 as promised. He moved through the crowd with the kind of presence that made people step aside without being asked, his eyes scanning the room with tactical awareness that 40 years of military service had made automatic. He found Jordan in the small changing room that Natalie had unlocked for her, sitting on a bench, hands wrapped, already dressed in compression shorts and a fitted athletic top. "Crowd's bigger than I expected," Preston said. "Tyler's been promoting it, wants witnesses when he restores his reputation." "You ready?" "Does it matter?" Preston sat beside her. "You know what Marcus would say if he could see you right now? That I'm an idiot for getting into a gym fight when I should be grieving. He'd say you're honoring him the only way you know how, by protecting someone who can't protect himself, by standing up to a bully, by keeping promises even when they hurt." Jordan flexed her hands, testing the wraps. "I told Victor this morning about Marcus. How'd he take it? Like a Marine, controlled until he wasn't. And you, like a SEAL, locked it down, did what needed doing." Preston was quiet for a moment. "You don't have to fight tonight, Hayes. You've already done what you came here to do. You told Victor, you stood up for him. Walking away now wouldn't make you weak." "Yes, it would. Tyler's out there telling everyone that yesterday was a fluke, that women don't belong in combat sports, that I got lucky. If I walk away, every woman who comes after me has to fight that narrative. So this isn't about Victor anymore. It's about all of it," Jordan said, standing. "Victor, Marcus, every person who thinks strength means dominance. Every bully who mistakes cruelty for power." She looked at Preston with eyes that had seen too much death and too little justice. "And it's about showing Tyler Harrison that there are levels he hasn't imagined, that his gym rat toughness is nothing compared to what real operators train for." What neither of them knew was that this fight would become something far more important than proving a point. It would become a turning point for everyone in that gym. They walked out together. The crowd noise increased when Jordan appeared, a mixture of anticipation and the ugly excitement that came from people hoping to see someone get hurt. Tyler was already on the mat, bouncing on his toes with nervous energy, throwing sharp combinations into the air. Each movement calculated to intimidate, to remind the crowd why they'd bet on him. Victor Bennett stood against the far wall, still in his maintenance uniform. His eyes met Jordan's across the room, and something passed between them, understanding, respect, the acknowledgement that some fights were bigger than the people fighting them. Natalie Harrison approached Jordan with an expression that mixed concern and resignation. "You don't have to do this. Tyler will get over it eventually. Will he stop treating your staff like garbage? Probably not. Then I have to do this." Natalie glanced at Preston, taking in the bearing, the quiet authority, the sealed trident pin on his collar. "Who's this?" "Colonel Barrett Preston, retired. He's here to make sure your brother doesn't do anything stupid." "Little late for that," Natalie muttered. She raised her voice to address the crowd. "All right, listen up. This is supposed to be controlled sparring. MMA rules. No strikes to back of head, no eye gouging, no fish hooking. First tap ends it. Everyone understand?" Tyler nodded, still bouncing, full of nervous energy and barely contained aggression. Jordan simply raised one hand in acknowledgement. "Touch gloves and—" Tyler didn't wait for her to finish. He exploded forward the moment Jordan's hand started to rise, closing the distance with a blitzing combination of punches designed to overwhelm before she could set her stance. It was exactly what Jordan had expected. She slipped the first punch, a right cross that would have landed clean if she'd been where Tyler expected. Pivoted inside the second, a left hook that found only air. The third, an overhand right with bad intentions, she caught on her forearm while simultaneously sweeping Tyler's lead leg. Tyler stumbled but didn't fall. His wrestling background gave him excellent balance, and he recovered quickly. But the opening exchange had already told him something he didn't want to know. She was faster than yesterday, sharper, like she'd been holding back during their first encounter and had decided to stop. "Come on," Tyler shouted, more to pump himself up than to intimidate her. "Fight me." Jordan moved forward, closing the distance Tyler usually controlled. Her striking was economical, each shot designed to create an opening rather than cause damage, a jab to test his guard. A leg kick to compromise his base, a level change that made him react, pulling his hips back, which was exactly what she wanted. She shot for a single leg, her mechanics perfect, her timing better. Tyler sprawled, but Jordan had already anticipated it. She ran the pipe, transitioning from the single to a body lock. And suddenly Tyler was airborne, his world rotating as she executed a textbook suplex that drove him into the mat with controlled force. The crowd gasped. That wasn't sport grappling. That was combat wrestling designed to break will as much as position. Jordan could have transitioned to mount, could have established dominant position and ground him down. Instead, she stood and backed away, giving him space to recover. "Get up," she said quietly. Tyler rose, breathing harder now, ego wounded worse than his body. The crowd was murmuring, students who'd bet on their instructor suddenly less certain of the outcome. He charged again, throwing power shots that telegraphed from across the room. Jordan slipped, ducked, parried, made him miss by margins so small they looked accidental. Then when he overextended on a wild haymaker, she caught his arm, rotated her hips, and threw him with a judo technique that sent him crashing to the mat again. Again, she backed away. "Get up." Tyler was slower this time. The confidence was gone, replaced by frustration and growing fear. He'd built his reputation on being the toughest person in the room, and this woman was systematically dismantling that reputation in front of everyone who mattered to him, and he was about to do something desperate. "Stop playing around," Tyler shouted. "Fight me for real." "This is real," Jordan said, her voice calm, almost gentle. "You're just not ready for it," Tyler snapped. He rushed forward with no technique, just rage and desperation, trying to use his size and strength to overwhelm what skill couldn't touch. He got his hands on her, grabbed a collar tie, threw a knee. Jordan absorbed the knee on her forearm, rotated into the clinch, and executed a standing arm triangle that cut off blood flow to Tyler's brain with surgical precision. He had perhaps 4 seconds before unconsciousness. He spent 2 of them trying to power out. Spent the third realizing he couldn't, tapped desperately with the 4th. Jordan released immediately and stepped back. Tyler stayed on his knees, gasping, his worldview cracking with each ragged breath. Everything he'd believed about strength, about dominance, about the natural order, all of it was being dismantled by a woman who wasn't even breathing hard. "Get up," Jordan said, but this time her voice carried something different. Not pity, not contempt, understanding. "Why?" Tyler's voice broke. "Why aren't you finishing this? Because this isn't about finishing you, it's about starting something different." The crowd murmured. This wasn't the spectacle they'd expected. This was something else entirely. Tyler pushed himself to his feet one last time, but the fight had left him, not just physically. Something deeper had shifted. He looked at Jordan and saw not an opponent, but a mirror reflecting everything he'd failed to be. "I give up," he said quietly, then louder to the crowd, "I surrender." The gym erupted. Some students booed, they'd wanted blood. Others understood they were witnessing something more important than violence. They were watching a man choose humility over pride. "Who the hell are you?" Tyler gasped, still on his knees, one hand on the mat for balance. Connor Wright stepped forward from the crowd. "She's a Navy SEAL, sir. Lieutenant Jordan Hayes, SEAL Team 3. The silence shattered into chaos. Students pulled out phones, searching her name, finding articles about the first women to complete SEAL training, finding operational records that were mostly classified but suggested deployments to places where wars weren't officially happening. And Tyler Harrison's entire worldview was about to crumble completely. Tyler looked up at Jordan, and for the first time she saw something other than arrogance in his eyes. She saw understanding, the realization that he'd challenged someone who operated at levels he couldn't comprehend. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. "Would it have changed how you treated Mr. Bennett?" Tyler had no answer. He looked across the room at Victor, seeing perhaps for the first time what Jordan had seen immediately. Not a janitor, not a burden, but a warrior who'd served his country and deserved better than contempt from someone who'd never known real combat. Preston spoke for the first time, his voice carrying effortlessly across the silent gym. "Your father was a cop, son, died in the line of duty. Is that right?" Tyler turned toward the voice, found the source, saw the trident pin, and understood. "Yes, sir." "What would he think of how you've been treating a Force Recon Marine? A man who served in the Gulf War in Somalia? What would your father say about you using your strength to humiliate instead of protect?" The words landed like physical blows. Tyler's face crumpled, years of built-up bravado collapsing under the weight of a question he'd been avoiding for a decade. I don't." He couldn't finish, didn't know how. Victor Bennett walked slowly across the mat. The crowd parted for him, this old man in a maintenance uniform who suddenly commanded more respect than anyone in the room. He stopped in front of Tyler, looked down at him, still kneeling on the mat. "Stand up, son," Victor said quietly. Tyler stood. His eyes were wet, tears he was too proud to wipe away. "I lost my boy 3 months ago," Victor continued, his voice steady despite the storm beneath it. "Marine, killed in action in Syria, found out this morning." And with those words, the entire gym understood that this fight had never been about ego or dominance. It had been about something far more sacred, a promise between warriors, a bond that transcended death itself. Tyler's expression shifted from humiliation to horror. "Mr. Bennett, I didn't know." "No, you didn't, because you never asked, never saw me as a person with a story, with a family, with a life beyond mopping your floors." Victor's voice remained controlled. "This woman here, she served with my son, made him a promise to check on me, and she kept that promise even though it meant telling me the hardest truth I've ever had to hear." He turned to Jordan. "She stood up for me when I couldn't stand up for myself. Fought for me when I'd forgotten I was worth fighting for." That's what real strength looks like, son. Not dominance, not ego, just the courage to protect people who need protecting. The gym stayed silent. Phones were still recording, capturing a moment that would spread far beyond these walls. Tyler looked at Jordan. "I'm sorry." Don't apologize to me, apologize to Mr. Bennett, to Connor, to everyone you've treated like they're less than you. Tyler turned back to Victor. Sir, I'm deeply sorry for everything, the way I've spoken to you, the disrespect. You served your country and I've been treating you like trash. That's unforgivable. It's not unforgivable, Victor said, but it does need to change. It will, I promise it will. Tyler addressed the crowd now, his voice carrying shame and determination in equal measure. This gym has been about the wrong things, about winning at any cost, about proving we're tougher than everyone else. But real toughness isn't about beating people down, it's about building them up. He looked at Jordan again. Would you teach a class? Show us what real combat training looks like. Jordan glanced at Preston, who nodded slightly. One class, she said. But I'm not here to prove women belong in combat. We already do. I'm here to honor a promise to a fallen brother, that's all. That's all I'm asking. The crowd began to disperse, students processing what they'd witnessed, narratives being revised in real time. Natalie approached her brother and without a word pulled him into a hug. Tyler broke then, the tears finally falling, years of pressure releasing in great shuddering sobs. Victor walked over to Jordan and Preston. He extended his hand to the colonel first. Sir, Preston shook it firmly. Semper Fi Marine, then to Jordan. Thank you, Lieutenant, for everything. I'm sorry it couldn't be different news, Mr. Bennett. So am I, but at least now I know, and I can start grieving properly instead of living in that strange limbo of hope and dread. He paused. Marcus would have liked you. Hell, I think he did like you. He always had good judgment about people. He was the best of us, Jordan said softly. Yes, he was, Connor Wright approached hesitantly. Ma'am, I just wanted to say thank you for standing up to him. Mr. Bennett is the only person here who's ever treated me like I matter. You do matter, Connor. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. I won't, ma'am, and sir. He turned to Preston. I'm thinking about re-enlisting. Army combat medic instructor position. Do you think that's stupid? With my TBI? I think, Preston said carefully, that teaching people how to save lives is one of the most important jobs in the military, and I think your experience, including your injury, makes you uniquely qualified to train the next generation. But you should talk to doctors, make sure you're ready. I will, sir, thank you. As the gym continued to empty, Tyler approached the small group. His eyes were still red, but his voice was steady. What he was about to offer would change Victor Bennett's life in ways none of them could yet imagine, and it would be the first step in Tyler Harrison's redemption. Mr. Bennett, Tyler said, I'd like to offer you a different position, not maintenance. Teaching, warrior ethics and mindset. Help me build a program that actually honors what you and my father stood for. Victor looked surprised. I'm 68 years old. I can't compete anymore. I don't need you to compete. I need you to teach what it means to be a warrior, the discipline, the honor, the code. Things I lost sight of somewhere along the way. Victor looked at Jordan. She nodded slightly. I'll think about it, Victor said. That's all I ask. 3 weeks later, Jordan stood at the front of a packed, ironclad combat academy, demonstrating close-quarters combat techniques to an audience that hung on every word. Preston assisted, playing the role of opponent, their movements flowing with the practiced synchronization of operators who'd trained together for years. Victor taught the session before hers, his class on warrior mindset filled with young students who discovered that the old janitor they'd ignored had stories that made action movies look tame. Connor had enrolled in the instructor program at Fort Sam Houston and would ship out in 2 months. Natalie had started a veteran physical therapy program, offering free sessions to former military dealing with injuries the VA wouldn't cover. And Tyler had transformed. Not overnight, not completely, but enough that students noticed. Enough that the atmosphere in the gym had shifted from competitive dominance to collective improvement. After class, Jordan found Victor in his new office, a small room that had been storage but was now furnished with a desk, a computer, and walls slowly filling with photographs. "How are you doing, sir?" she asked. Victor looked up from the lesson plan he was writing. "Some days are better than others. I'm planning the memorial finally. 3 months late, but better late than never." "When?" 2 weeks from Saturday, Fort Rosecrans. They found a spot for him near some of his Marine brothers. He paused. "Will you be there?" "I wouldn't miss it, sir." "Good, he'd want you there." Victor stood and pulled something from his desk drawer, Marcus's dog tags. "I want you to take these to the memorial. We'll bury them together, both of us." "Sir, those should stay with you." "No," Victor's voice was firm. "You carry them until then. You were his sister in arms. You've earned the right." Jordan took the tags, the metal cool against her palm. She could still remember Marcus wearing them, the soft clink they made against his body armor. But what neither of them knew was that the memorial would bring a revelation that would change Victor's life forever. "Lieutenant," Victor said, "I need to tell you something I should have said weeks ago." She waited. "When you told me about Marcus, I was angry at you, at the world, at myself. I blamed you for surviving when he didn't, and that was wrong. That was my grief talking, not my sense." "Mr. Bennett, you don't need to." "Yes, I do." His grip on the desk tightened. "Marcus saved you because that's who he was, a protector, and by keeping your promise to him, by standing up for me, by refusing to let Tyler's cruelty go unchallenged, you're honoring what he died for. You're living the values he fought to defend." Jordan felt the sting behind her eyes. "I don't know if I deserve." "None of us deserve what we get, good or bad, but we can choose what we do with it. You chose to keep a promise to a dead man. That's honor, Lieutenant. That's what warriors do." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of loss and gratitude balanced between them. "The memorial," Victor said finally. 2 weeks from Saturday. Will you help me plan it? I don't know how to say goodbye." "We'll do it together, sir. He was yours by blood, but he was mine by battle. We'll honor him properly." Victor nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. "Thank you, Lieutenant, for keeping your promise, for standing up when it mattered, for showing an old man that he still has purpose." 6 months later, the memorial service at Fort Rosecrans National Cemetery overlooked the Pacific Ocean, waves rolling against cliffs in an endless rhythm. Victor stood with Jordan, Preston, Tyler, Natalie, and Connor, along with 24 members of SEAL Team 3 who deployed with Marcus. The ceremony was brief but powerful. Victor gave a eulogy that spoke of pride and regret, love and loss, a father's grief mixed with gratitude for the men and women who'd served alongside his son. Jordan added Marcus's dog tags to the memorial, her dress whites crisp in the ocean breeze, her face composed despite the storm inside. As the ceremony concluded and people began to disperse, Jordan noticed a young woman, perhaps 25, with a toddler on her hip, approaching Victor hesitantly. She had Marcus's eyes. "Mr. Bennett," the woman said quietly, her voice trembling. I was Marcus's wife, Emily, and this is Jackson, your grandson." The world seemed to tilt. Everything Victor thought he knew about his son's life, about his own isolation, about the finality of death, all of it was about to be rewritten in the most unexpected way. Victor froze. "I didn't know. Marcus never said. We got married 6 months before his last deployment. He wanted to tell you after he got back. After you'd both had time to cool down from your fight, he wanted to introduce you properly." Emily's voice cracked. "He talked about you constantly, about making things right, about wanting Jackson to know his grandfather." Victor stared at the child, Marcus's son, with wonder and heartbreak warring on his face. "May I?" Emily shifted the toddler toward him. Victor took his grandson with shaking hands, and the little boy grabbed his finger with a grip that was pure Bennett stubbornness. "Hi, Jackson," Victor whispered. "I'm your grandpa. I wish your daddy could see this." Jordan turned away, giving them privacy, and found Preston watching with understanding in his eyes. "Didn't see that coming," he murmured. "Neither did Victor, but Marcus is still taking care of his old man even now. That's the thing about warriors, Ghost. Their legacy doesn't end with their last breath. It ripples forward." Afterward, Tyler approached with something in his hands, an ironclad Combat Academy T-shirt carefully folded. "I know it's not much," he said, "but I wanted Marcus to have this, as a reminder that his sacrifice changed more than just a military outcome. He changed me through you, through his father, through the example he set." He placed the shirt at the base of the memorial stone. "For Corporal Marcus Bennett, USMC, who taught a bully what strength really means. Semper Fi." The group stood in silence as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Victor's hand found Jordan's, gripping it tight, a father and a surrogate sister united in grief and gratitude. "He'd be proud of you," Victor said quietly, "of what you've become, what you've done." "I hope so, sir. I know so." As the sun touched the horizon, Victor stood with Jackson in his arms, Emily beside him, Tyler and Natalie flanking them like family. Connor was there too, back from Fort Sam Houston for the weekend, wearing his new instructor uniform with pride. Colonel Preston placed a hand on Jordan's shoulder. "You did good, Ghost, better than good. I kept a promise, that's all. No, you did more than that. You reminded all of us what we're fighting for, not for glory, not for recognition, for each other, for the people we leave behind, for the promises that outlive us." Jordan looked one last time at Marcus's memorial stone, then at the family gathered around it. A family that wouldn't exist in this form without her intervention, without her refusal to let Victor suffer alone. And for the first time since Syria, she felt the weight on her chest ease slightly. Not forgiveness, not yet. But maybe, eventually, something close to peace. She walked back to the memorial, knelt, and traced Marcus's name with her finger. "Rest easy, brother. Your old man's not alone anymore. I'll make sure of it." The wind carried her words away toward the ocean, toward whatever lay beyond. She stood, squared her shoulders in that way seals do when they're preparing to face whatever comes next, and walked toward the parking lot where her team was waiting. Behind her, Victor's laughter mixed with his grandson's, and Tyler's voice carried across the cemetery as he promised to teach the boy martial arts when he was old enough. The circle wasn't just complete, it was expanding. Marcus Bennett's legacy would live on, not in stone and ceremony, but in the lives he'd touched, the family he'd protected even in death, and the warriors who refused to let his sacrifice be forgotten. That was the promise Jordan Hayes had kept, and that was worth more than all the medals in the world. As they walked back toward the parking area, Jordan looked back one last time at the memorial stone. Marcus's name was carved there alongside his dates, his rank, his decorations. But that wasn't what she saw. She saw her swim buddy pushing through Hell Week with determination that matched her own. Saw him laughing during training, serious during operations, human in the quiet moments between chaos. Saw him making the choice that ended his life and saved hers, because that's what warriors did for each other. And she made a silent promise to a name carved in stone, to keep living in a way that honored his sacrifice, to protect those who needed protection, to stand up to bullies and defend the defenseless, to be the kind of warrior he'd been, the kind who understood that true strength wasn't about dominance but about service. "What now?" Preston asked as they reached the parking lot. Jordan looked at the ocean, at the sky, at the world that kept turning despite the holes that loss left behind. "Now I go back to my team, back to the work, but I'll visit, check on Victor, make sure Tyler stays on the right path, keep the promise." Always keeping promises. It's what we do, Hawk, it's who we are. And as the sun finally slipped below the horizon, Lieutenant Jordan Hayes walked toward whatever came next, carrying the weight of promises kept and the knowledge that some fights were worth having, some stands were worth taking, and some warriors, even in death, could change the world simply by showing others what courage looked like. Behind her, carved in stone, Marcus Bennett's name stood watch over the ocean, a permanent reminder that heroes came in many forms, that sacrifice had meaning, and that the bonds forged in combat could transform strangers into family. And in a gym in San Diego, Victor Bennett would teach another generation what it meant to be a warrior, passing on wisdom earned through decades of service and loss, ensuring that his son's legacy lived on in every student who learned that real strength protects, never destroys. The circle was complete. The promise was kept. And in the spaces between grief and hope, something like peace began slowly to take root. A story about promises kept, warriors lost, and the strength to stand up when standing costs everything. About fathers and sons, guilt and redemption, and the understanding that true power lies not in dominance, but in the courage to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Up next, you've got 2 more incredible stories waiting on your screen. If this one hit you, tap to watch the next, and make sure you're subscribed with notifications on. Oh, and drop your city in the comments. I want to see where you're watching from.